right, we're going to look over Chapter 2 and an overview of part of Chapter 2. The first thing that Chapter 2 looks at is it looks at what an account is. And an account is an individual accounting record. An account will have debits in it as well as credits. Now remember that a debit is abbreviated as DR and it simply means left. A credit is CR and it simply means right. When we look at debits and credits as well as accounts, what we have to realize is that there is a normal balance. And with a normal balance, what we see is this is how we increase an account. So we have certain accounts such as cash that are going to be increased on that left side as a debit. We have other accounts such as the capital account that would be increased on the right side and would therefore be a credit. So we do have with normal balances, some accounts are increased with debits, some accounts are increased with credits, and so we just have to know what's going on with each account. The other thing that the chapter really is focusing on is it's a continuation of the accounting process. We actually will be covering the accounting process in chapters 1 all the way through chapter 4. In chapter 1, we looked at how we analyze transactions. What we're going to look at in chapter 2 is journalizing transactions, posting transactions, as well as looking at the trial balance. When we look at all of these, what we find is with the journalizing, this is where we record entries in a general journal. So we analyze a transaction, then we record that transaction in the journal, and then what we would do is we would then post that transaction into our general ledger. Now, posting is where we take the information from the general journal and we copy it into the general ledger. The general ledger is going to consist of a list of all of the accounts. And it's going to really keep up with the balances for every account that we have in our books. And the last thing that we look at in chapter 2 is that trial balance, because we actually have to prepare a trial balance. Now, what is a trial balance? Well, a trial balance is where we actually take the ledger and we find out the balance for every account, and then what we're going to do is we are going to list out every account and we will look at if it's a debit or if it is a credit. We will list out the balance in a debit column or a credit column. Then we will go through and total up all of our debits. We will total all of our credits, and those two totals actually should balance when we get through with the trial balance. The next section that I'm going to look at looks at going into a little bit more depth with the journalizing. What we use in accounting is a double entry accounting system. Every entry must have at least one debit and it needs to have at least one credit. The amount of the debits must equal the amount of the credit. We have two different ways of looking at this. We have the simple entry. With a simple entry, what we find is that you have to have two accounts, and this is a must. Every journal entry has to have at least two accounts. It needs one debit and one credit. And in that simple entry, that's all you're going to have is one debit and one credit. The other type that we can have is a compound entry. This is where we have 3 or more accounts being used. With all of our journal entries, we always list the debit items first, and then after we finish listing all of the debit items, then we would go in and we would list all of the credit items. So if we were to have 2 debits in our entry, we would list those 2 debits first, and if we had 1 credit, it would go at the bottom. Now with those 3 or more accounts, we could have 2 debits, 1 credit. We could have 1 debit, 2 credits. We could have 2 debits, 2 credits. It really is limitless. The only thing that we have to realize is that the total in the amount column for our debit has to equal the total in our credit column for that total entry. And so that is what we are going to be looking at in this chapter, is really looking at all of these items.